What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 4. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over each position and break down a couple of my favorite players for this NFL DFS Week 4 main slate. And if you stay to the very end after all my picks and after I show you the Draft Dashboard tools, I'll give you my super secret sleeper pick that no one's talking about. Oh, and after our sleeper pick, click the video in the middle of the screen to continue getting more DFS picks for NFL Week 4. Okay, let's take a look at the quarterback position. So up top, we got Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Deshaun Watson. Those are our top 3 priced quarterbacks this week. Patrick Mahomes is going to be about 18% owned, while Lamar Jackson is only going to be 2% owned. So if you want to go with the field, go with Patrick Mahomes. And if you want to be different with one of those top tier quarterbacks, you can go with Lamar Jackson at only 2% ownership. But I'm coming down in salary for my quarterback here in Week 4. I really like the guys that are around the $6,100 to $6,300 price range. You got Jared Goff, Phillip Rivers, and Russell Wilson. Goff at $6,300, Rivers at $6,200, and Russell Wilson at $6,100 DraftKings salary. The field is going with Russell Wilson. He's going to be about 15% owned because he's got a fantastic matchup going against the Arizona Cardinals, who have the 3rd worst defense overall and give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Russell Wilson is averaging right around 30 fantasy points a game. He's rushing the ball 6 times per game, and he's projected to score 21.8 fantasy points here in Week 4. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in that Seattle-Arizona game, and they have it close, within a touchdown. Seattle is favored by 6, so I'm going to have plenty of Russell Wilson, but I'm also going to have some Phillip Rivers and Jared Goff. Phillip Rivers has got a great matchup versus a terrible Miami defense, the worst defense overall, and the 2nd worst defense defending opposing quarterbacks. Phillip Rivers has scored 21.2 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 24 fantasy points last week. He's projected at 19.7 fantasy points here in Week 4. There's not as many points projected in that game, only 44.5, but the Chargers are projected to score most of them, favored by 14.5 points. So Phillip Rivers could rack up a lot of fantasy points in the first half. You just hope that game stays somewhat competitive so he has to continue throwing the ball. But that's why I like my 3rd quarterback, Jared Goff, from the LA Rams, playing the Tampa Bay Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So he doesn't have as good of a matchup on paper as Rivers and Wilson, and he's only scoring 16 fantasy points per game so far this season. He scored 17 fantasy points last game, 20 the game before that, so he's heating up now. His wide receivers are coming into form. He's got Cooper Kupp, who's got a fantastic cornerback matchup here in Week 4. And Jared Goff is only going to be around 1% owned, so super low ownership. He's a great tournament play, projected at 19.5 fantasy points here in Week 4. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, and the Rams are favored by 9. This is a home game for the Rams. I think Jared Goff has a breakout game here in Week 4. The ownership is low, and his salary won't kill your lineup. So I like Jared Goff here versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Now, if we want to come way down in salary, of course, we've got Daniel Jones from the New York Giants playing the Washington Redskins. He's got a great matchup. The Redskins have the 3rd worst defense overall and give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Daniel Jones scored 39 fantasy points last week in his season debut. He had 4 rush attempts. He's going to be about 14% owned, so he's going to be a fan favorite here in Week 4. He's projected at 18.2 fantasy points here in Week 4. He's only $5,300 DraftKings salary, and 2,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, with the Giants favored by only 3. So this is going to be a competitive game. There should be lots of fantasy points scored in this game, and that's why Daniel Jones is going to be so heavily owned. His price is low, his upside is high like he showed last week, but I'm going to be a little weary here with this guy coming off of a 39-point game. I'm going to have my share of Daniel Jones, but I'm not going to get too crazy with him. And moving down in salary even more, one of my favorite GPP quarterback plays for week 4 is Case Keenum from the Washington Redskins playing the New York Giants, who have the second worst defense overall and give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Case Keenum is averaging 22.2 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 20 fantasy points last week in a game that he was terrible. He's going to be about 6% owned, projected at 16.6 fantasy points here in week 4. He's only $4,900 DraftKings salary. He's $2,300 more on FanDuel, so I love that DraftKings price. John Gruden said they're going to stick with Case Keenum, even if he throws another 3 interceptions like last week. I don't know how he managed to score 20 fantasy points, but now he's got a great matchup versus a weak New York Giants defense. So if you want to take a shot on a GPP quarterback, I like Case Keenum here versus the New York Giants.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $100 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And then we'll send you $100 PayPal.
So it's that easy?
And we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video.
So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. At the top, I like Christian McCaffrey. I like him over Austin Eckler this week. He's only $800 more on DraftKings. And given the news that Melvin Gordon might take some snaps, and this game could be a blowout, it's making me favor Christian McCaffrey. Of course, I'm still going to have my shares of Austin Eckler, but I think I'm going to have more McCaffrey in a game that should be a more competitive game with more total points scored. So Christian McCaffrey facing the Houston Texans, who have the 9th worst defense overall, and they've been pretty good against opposing running backs so far. But Christian McCaffrey has scored 28 fantasy points per game on the season. He's getting an average of 7 pass targets per game and 20 rush attempts per game. So that's a ton of volume. And now with Cam Newton out, you know that Christian McCaffrey is going to get the bulk of the work. He's going to be about 23% owned. He's on the field for 98% of the snaps and touches the ball almost 40% of that time. So monster usage for Christian McCaffrey. We know who this guy is. He's projected at 21.9 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $8,800 DraftKings salary and $200 more on FanDuel. I just feel a little safer playing McCaffrey at $8,800 versus Austin Eckler at $8,000, but I definitely like them both. So I like Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler as your stud running backs here in week 4. Coming down in salary a little bit, down to the mid-tier running back range, I like David Johnson from the Arizona Cardinals playing the Seattle Seahawks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing running backs. David Johnson has scored 17.5 fantasy points per game on the season. He's rushing the ball an average of 12 times per game, but he's getting about 6 pass targets a game. So he's almost reaching that 20 touch per game mark. He's going to be about 12% owned, so half the ownership of McCaffrey and Eckler. He's on the field for 79% of the snaps, and he's touched the ball 30% of that time. He's projected at 17.6 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $6,800 DraftKings salary and the same price on FanDuel. So I like that FanDuel price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, and it's a competitive game. Within 5 points, the Seattle Seahawks are favored by 5. David Johnson isn't going to be off the field if they're trailing. He'll be on the field getting touches, blowout or not. So I like David Johnson here versus the Seattle Seahawks. Another running back I like in this mid-salary range is Derrick Henry from the Tennessee Titans playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing running backs. Derrick Henry has scored 19.3 fantasy points per game on the season. He's getting an average of 17 touches a game and 2.3 targets per game. He's going to be about 6% owned. He's on the field for 52% of the snaps, and he touches the ball 56% of that time. So nice usage when he's on the field. And Derrick Henry is projected at 13.8 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $6,300 DraftKings salary and $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 55.5 points scored in this game, and they've got the Falcons favored by 3.5. So this should be a competitive game, and so far Derrick Henry hasn't laid an egg. He's been productive each and every week, so I like Derrick Henry here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Another mid-salary running back I like is Marlon Mack from the Indianapolis Colts, playing the Oakland Raiders, who have the 6th worst defense overall and give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. I've been on Marlon Mack since day 1 of the season. He's scored 17.8 fantasy points per game on the season. He's getting 20.3 rush attempts per game and 2 targets per game. He's going to be about 15% owned. He's on the field for 68% of the snaps and touches the ball 48% of that time. He's projected at 16.2 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $6,100 DraftKings salary and $1,200 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 55.5 points scored in this game. They've got the Colts favored by almost a touchdown. This is a home game, a favorable matchup, and with that injury to T.Y. Hilton, Marlon Mack could be in for more work here. So I like Marlon Mack here versus the Oakland Raiders. Now, coming down in salary to one of the lower salary running backs, I think this guy is going overlooked this week. I like Josh Jacobs from the Oakland Raiders, playing the Indianapolis Colts, who have the 10th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Josh Jacobs only scored 4 fantasy points last week, but he's averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He's averaging 15 rush attempts per game and only 1 pass target per game. Because of that bad performance last week, his ownership has dropped all the way to 2%. He's on the field for 54% of the snaps, and he touches the ball 49% of that time. He's projected at 11.8 fantasy points here in week 4. He's only $5,100 DraftKings salary and $900 more on FanDuel. I'm not going to go super heavy with Josh Jacobs, but I think this is one of the low ownership running backs that has a chance to score double-digit fantasy points this week. The Oakland Raiders could best the Indianapolis Colts here. The Oakland Raiders are only projected to be trailing by a touchdown, so it should be a somewhat competitive game here. So if you want to differentiate your lineup, this is a nice GPP play at the running back position. I like Josh Jacobs versus the Indianapolis Colts. Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups. Okay, who do we have at the wide receiver position? I like Cooper Kupp from the LA Rams, playing the Tampa Bay Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing wide receivers. Cooper Kupp scored 36 fantasy points last game. He scored 22.8 fantasy points per game on the season. He got 12 pass targets last game, and he's averaging 10.3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 14% owned. He's on the field for 94% of the snaps and touches the ball 16% of that time. He's got a fantastic cornerback matchup this week, and he's projected to score 17.5 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $6,500 DraftKings salary and $500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, and the LA Rams are favored by 9. This is a home game. Cooper Kupp looks to be one of Jared Goff's favorite targets, so I like Cooper Kupp here versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Okay, coming way down in salary here, if you're looking to save some salary at the wide receiver position, take a look at Preston Williams from the Miami Dolphins playing the LA Chargers, who have the 11th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing wide receivers. Preston Williams has scored 10.8 fantasy points per game on the season in an average of 7.7 targets per game. He got 12 targets last game. He's been a consistent fantasy producer, and he's only going to be 1% owned. He's on the field for 72% of the snaps, and he touches the ball 17% of that time. He's projected at 10 fantasy points here in week 4, and he's only $3,900 DraftKings salary, $1,300 more on FanDuel, and Vegas thinks his team is going to be trailing by 14.5 points. So that's going to be a lot of passing so that's got a passing game script for the Miami Dolphins written all over it. That's why Preston Williams is getting so many targets. Miami Dolphins are always playing from behind. This is a home game for the Dolphins, so I like Preston Williams here versus the LA Chargers. Another low salary wide receiver I like this week is Paul Richardson from the Washington Redskins playing the New York Giants, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Paul Richardson has scored 13.5 fantasy points per game on the season off of 6.3 targets per game. He scored 22 fantasy points last week off of 9 pass targets. He's going to be about 11% owned. He's on the field for 83% of the snaps, and he touches the ball 11% of the time. He's projected at 11.3 fantasy points here in week 4. He's only $3,700 DraftKings salary and 1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, and the Giants are favored by 3 points here. So it should be a competitive game, and we got news that Terry McLaurin picked up a hamstring injury during the week, and although it looks like he's going to play, we're not sure if he's going to be full strength or limited, so that's why I like Paul Richardson here. With the question to Terry McLaurin, they could be throwing the ball to the other receivers using Terry as a decoy. So I like Paul Richardson here versus the New York Giants. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. There's a couple of tight ends in this mid-salary range that I really like this week. First, we've got Evan Ingram from the New York Giants playing the Washington Redskins, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Evan Ingram has scored 22.9 fantasy points per game on the season off of 10 pass targets per game. He scored 26 fantasy points last week off of 8 pass targets, and he's going to be about 21% owned. On the field for 81% of the snaps, he touches the ball 18% of that time. Fantastic usage numbers for the tight end position. He's projected at 16.7 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $5,700 DraftKings salary and $1,100 more on FanDuel. With a projected 49 points in this game, should be plenty of scoring to go around. This is a home game, so this is a game script that's going to favor Evan Ingram. He's got a new quarterback at the helm that seems to be a lot more capable than Eli Manning. So I like Evan Ingram here versus the Washington Redskins. Now, if you want to come down off of that Evan Ingram ownership to a guy about the same salary, take a look at Darren Waller from the Oakland Raiders playing the Indianapolis Colts, who have the 10th worst defense overall, and they give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Darren Waller is averaging 18.8 fantasy points per game, and he's getting 9.7 pass targets per game. He scored 30 fantasy points last week off of 14 pass targets, and he even got 1 rush attempt in there. He's going to be about 12% owned, so half that of Evan Ingram, and he's on the field for 95% of the snaps and touches the ball 17% of the time. Monster usage for the tight end position. He's projected at 14.9 fantasy points here in week 4, and he's $5,200 DraftKings salary and $1,500 more on FanDuel. So this is a nice tight end play if you want to come down off of Evan Ingram. He could be the highest tight end scorer on the slate again this week. So I like Darren Waller here versus the Indianapolis Colts. Now, if you're looking to save some salary at the tight end position, take a look at Austin Hooper from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Tennessee Titans, who've got a good defense overall, but they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Austin Hooper is averaging 16.2 fantasy points per game on the season, off of 7.3 pass targets per game. He's heavily involved in this Atlanta passing offense. He scored 25 fantasy points last week. He's going to be 8% owned, and he's on the field for 81% of the snaps and touches the ball 13% of the time. So another tight end that's got high snap count and a high usage. He's projected at 12.1 fantasy points here in week 4, and he's only $4,300 DraftKings salary. He's $2,100 more on FanDuel, so I love that DraftKings price. This is a home game, so I like Austin Hooper here versus the Tennessee Titans. And there's 3 more tight ends that I like right around this same salary as Austin Hooper. You got Greg Olsen at $4,200 DraftKings salary, and Eric Ebron at $4,000 DraftKings salary. And then you have the week 4 chalk tight end, Will Dissly, at 20% ownership. Will Dissly facing the Arizona Cardinals that will be without Patrick Peterson again this week. The Arizona Cardinals are the 2nd worst defense overall and give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Will Dissly has scored 14.1 fantasy points per game on the season on an average of 5 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 20% owned. He's on the field for 56% of the snaps and touches the ball 12% of that time. He's projected at 11.3 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $3,600 DraftKings salary and $1,800 more on FanDuel. So I love that DraftKings price. So if you want to come off of Will Dissly, don't forget about Eric Ebron, Greg Olsen, and Austin Hooper. Those guys got much lower ownership, with Eric Ebron being the lowest at only 1%. So Eric Ebron is the GPP play here, but these are all capable tight ends in this salary range. I'll probably have the most exposure to Will Dissly because of the fantastic matchup versus Arizona, but I'll also have my shares of Austin Hooper, Greg Olsen, and Eric Ebron. I'm even going to have a little TJ Hawkinson down here at $3,300 DraftKings salary. He's only going to be about 7% owned. He's had a bad couple of games since his week 1 explosion with 28 fantasy points, but he's got a good matchup here versus a high-scoring Kansas City Chiefs team. But don't be surprised if TJ Hawkinson makes a splash versus the Kansas City Chiefs here in week 4.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
You've unlocked the bonus content. My super secret sleeper pick for week 4 is Trey Quinn from the Washington Redskins playing the New York Giants, who have the 2nd worst defense overall and give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Trey Quinn has scored 9.6 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's getting about 7 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 9% owned this week. He's on the field for 83% of the snaps, and he touches the ball 12% of the time. He's projected to get 8.6 fantasy points here in week 4, and he's only $3,000 DraftKings salary. He's $2,400 more on FanDuel, so I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, and remember we mentioned that hamstring injury to Terry McLaurin, so that could mean more work for Trey Quinn. So I like Trey Quinn here versus the New York Giants.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.
Do you want more DFS picks for NFL Week 4? Check out the video linked right in the middle of the screen. Tap that video to continue getting our Week 4 DFS picks. That's right, more DraftKings picks, more FanDuel picks. Don't miss out on our free content. Hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second, means a lot to us. Thanks again, and thanks for watching.